Do you ever get out of bed in the morning and feel like your body needs a few minutes just to wake up? Maybe your back feels stiff when you bend down. Maybe your knees don't feel quite as comfortable when you climb the stairs. Or perhaps reaching overhead has become harder than it used to be, and your shoulders simply don't seem to move the way they once did. If any of that sounds familiar, here's something important to consider. The problem may not always be that your body has become weak. Sometimes, your body simply isn't moving enough. And when certain joints spend years moving through only a small range of motion, everyday movements can gradually start to feel restricted, awkward, or uncomfortable. But here's the good news. Your body is remarkably adaptable. With the right movements, practiced consistently, and within a comfortable range, you can work on maintaining and improving your mobility at almost any age. Now, you may have noticed the title of this video says, 5 Mobility Exercises that fix 95% of your problems. Let me be very clear about that number. No 5 exercises can literally fix 95% of all physical problems. That's not how the human body works. But there is a reason these 5 movements are worth learning. They target several areas that are extremely important for everyday movement: your ankles, hips, spine, shoulders, and your ability to control your own body when standing and sitting. And when those areas move well, ordinary tasks can become much easier. Think about a 2-year-old who can still walk around the neighborhood without much trouble, but suddenly struggles to put on his socks, reach something from a high shelf, get into the back seat of a car, or stand up comfortably from a low chair. He may not think of himself as having a mobility problem. He may simply say, "Well, I guess I'm getting older." But those small changes in everyday movement are exactly why mobility deserves your attention. Because mobility isn't about doing impressive stretches or touching your toes. It's about being able to move your body well enough to live your life with confidence and independence. So in this video, we're going to work through 5 simple movements. We'll start with your ankles. Then we'll move to your hips, your spine, and your shoulders. And finally, we'll finish with a whole body movement that brings everything together. You won't need a gym. You won't need expensive equipment. And you certainly don't need to be flexible like a gymnast. You simply need a few minutes, a sturdy chair or wall when necessary, and a willingness to move within your own comfortable range. So let's begin. Because the goal isn't to make you move like you're 25 again. The goal is to help you keep moving well for the life you want to live. Before we get into the 5 exercises, there's something you need to understand about mobility. Because mobility is not the same thing as strength. And it's not exactly the same thing as flexibility either. Strength is your body's ability to produce force. For example, how much force your legs can produce when you stand up from a chair. Flexibility is about how far your muscles and joints can move. But mobility is different. Mobility is your ability to actively control your body through a useful range of movement. Think about reaching for something on a high shelf. You don't just need a flexible shoulder. You need enough movement in the shoulder, enough strength to control that movement, and enough coordination to use it safely. That's mobility. And this is why simply stretching more isn't always the answer. Good mobility is a combination of movement, control, strength, balance, and coordination. So why does mobility often become more difficult as we get older? It's not simply because you're getting older. Aging itself doesn't mean you're destined to become stiff. What often happens is that we gradually move less. Maybe you spend several hours sitting at a desk. Then you sit in the car. Then you sit on the couch. And before you realize it, your hips, ankles, spine, and shoulders may spend most of the day moving through the same limited ranges. Physical activity may decrease too. You may walk less than you did years ago. You may stop lifting things regularly. You may avoid movements that once felt easy because they're uncomfortable. Previous injuries can also change the way you move. And when muscle strength decreases, your body may become less capable of controlling certain positions. The result isn't necessarily one dramatic change. It's usually a collection of small changes that happen gradually. You wake up a little stiffer. You bend down a little less. You stop reaching quite as high. You use your hands to push yourself out of a chair. And eventually, movements you never thought about before start requiring conscious effort. This brings us to something important: the stiffness to compensation cycle. Your body doesn't simply stop moving when one area becomes restricted. It often finds another way to complete the movement. For example, if your ankles don't move comfortably, you may change the way you squat or climb stairs. If your hips don't move well, your lower back may have to contribute more during certain movements. And if your shoulders don't move comfortably overhead, you may start lifting or rotating through your neck and upper back instead. Your body is incredibly good at finding solutions. But not every compensation is ideal when repeated over and over again. And this is where a little gentle caution is important. If you continually avoid movement because your body feels stiff, you can end up moving even less. And when movement decreases, everyday activities can gradually become harder. Walking, climbing stairs, getting down to the floor, putting on your socks, reaching into a cupboard, getting out of the car, even standing up from your favorite chair. These things may sound simple, but they are actually some of the movements that allow you to live independently. And that's the real reason we're talking about mobility. This isn't about touching your toes. It's not about becoming incredibly flexible. And it's certainly not about turning yourself into an athlete. It's about keeping your body capable of doing the things you want and need to do. You want to be able to get out of a chair without thinking twice. You want to walk with confidence. You want to reach for something on a shelf. You want to put your clothes and shoes on without struggling. You want to turn your head and body when you're walking or getting into a car. And most importantly, you want to keep doing the things you love without feeling like your body is constantly getting in the way. That's the goal of this routine. Not perfection, not extreme flexibility, just better, more controlled movement, one small step at a time. Now that you understand why mobility matters, let's get into the 5 movements. And I want you to remember one thing before we begin. You do not need to force your body into a position it isn't ready for. These exercises are about controlled movement, not pain, competition, or trying to become flexible overnight. Move slowly, breathe normally, and stay within a range that feels comfortable for you. If you experience sharp, severe, or unusual pain, stop the movement rather than trying to push through it. Let's start from the ground up. Exercise: Hasson, ankle, dorsiflexion rock. We're starting with the ankles because they may be small, but they play a surprisingly important role in how your entire lower body moves. Your ankles help you walk, climb stairs, squat, maintain balance, and move smoothly from one position to another. When ankle movement becomes restricted, certain everyday movements can start feeling awkward. You might notice it when going downstairs. You might feel it when trying to squat, or you may simply notice that your body doesn't feel as stable as it once did. Here's a simple way to work on ankle mobility. Stand facing a wall or another sturdy support. Place one foot slightly in front of the other. Keep the heel of your front foot firmly on the floor. Now, slowly allow your front knee to move forward toward the wall. You don't need to touch the wall. Just move the knee forward as far as you comfortably can while keeping the heel down. Then, slowly move back to the starting position. And repeat. Keep the movement smooth. Don't bounce. Don't force the knee forward. After several controlled repetitions, switch sides. As you perform this movement, you should feel gentle movement around the ankle. You should not be forcing the joint, and you should not feel sharp pain. If your balance isn't very good, keep one hand on the wall or another stable surface. And if the movement feels restricted, simply make the range smaller. Remember, you're not trying to win a flexibility contest. You're teaching your body that this movement is safe and useful. And this is the kind of mobility that can help make movements such as walking, climbing stairs, and bending down feel more natural. Exercise: #2 hip 90 over 90 rotations. Now let's move up to the hips. Your hips are designed to move in multiple directions. They flex, they extend, and they rotate. But many of us spend a huge portion of the day sitting in almost the same position. So we're going to give the hips a chance to move differently. For this exercise, sit on the floor with your knees bent and your legs positioned comfortably. If you're able to, place your legs so that your knees can move from one side toward the other. Now slowly rotate your knees toward one side. Then move them back through the middle and toward the other side. Keep the movement controlled. Don't force your knees toward the floor. You don't need to achieve a perfect 90/90 position. If your hips are tight, your range may be quite small at first. And that's okay. Use your hands on the floor for support if you need them. If getting onto the floor is difficult, don't skip the exercise. Sit on a cushion or a slightly elevated surface. You can also perform a simpler seated hip rotation using a chair. The goal is simply to introduce controlled rotation into the hips. Why does this matter? Think about putting on your shoes, getting into a car, turning while you're sitting, or changing direction while walking. Your hips need to rotate and adapt during many of these everyday movements. You don't need perfect hip mobility. You simply want to maintain enough movement to make life easier. And here's where I want you to stay patient. If your hips feel stiff today, that doesn't mean they will always feel this way. Your starting point is simply your starting point. With consistent, comfortable practice, you may gradually find certain movements easier. That's progress, not perfection. Exercise #3. Cat-cow spinal mobility flow. Next, we're going to work on your spine. Your spine isn't designed to remain completely rigid all day. It is built to move. But think about how much time many people spend sitting. At a desk, in a car, on a couch, at the dinner table. When your body spends hours in relatively similar positions, movement can start to feel less comfortable. The cat-cow movement gives your spine a gentle opportunity to move through flexion and extension. Start on your hands and knees on a comfortable surface. Place your hands underneath or slightly in front of your shoulders and position your knees comfortably underneath your hips. Now slowly round your back. Think about gently drawing your abdomen inward as your spine moves. Then slowly move in the opposite direction, allowing your spine to extend comfortably. There's no need to exaggerate either position. Just move from one position to the other in a slow, controlled rhythm, and breathe naturally throughout the movement. Don't hold your breath. The most important thing here is control. This isn't a competition to see who can create the biggest spinal bend. You're simply moving your spine. If getting onto the floor is difficult for you, there's another option. Stand beside a sturdy chair or wall for support. From there, you can perform a gentle standing spinal movement, slowly rounding and then extending your upper body through a comfortable range. The goal is to find a version of the movement that works for your body, and think about where you use spinal mobility every day. Getting out of bed, bending down to pick something up, turning to look behind you, moving around the kitchen, getting into or out of a car. These movements don't require extreme flexibility. They require your body to move and coordinate different parts comfortably. So keep it slow, keep it gentle, and let your breathing stay relaxed. Exercise #4 wall shoulder slides. Now we're moving to the shoulders. Shoulder mobility becomes especially noticeable when everyday reaching starts becoming difficult. Maybe you can't reach the top shelf as comfortably. Maybe putting on a jacket feels awkward. Maybe reaching behind your back has become harder. Or perhaps you notice that your neck and upper shoulders seem to work overtime whenever you reach overhead. That's why we're going to use a simple wall shoulder slide. Stand with your back near a wall. Start with your arms in a comfortable position. You don't need to force your back, elbows, or hands completely against the wall. From there, slowly slide your arms upward. Only go as high as you can comfortably control, then slowly bring them back down. And repeat. The slower you move, the more attention you can give to how your shoulders are actually moving. Here's a very important point. Don't force your shoulders against the wall just because you saw someone else doing it. And don't shrug your shoulders aggressively toward your ears. You also don't need to chase the biggest possible range of motion. A smaller movement performed with good control is often a better starting point than a huge movement performed by forcing your body into position. If standing is uncomfortable, perform the movement while seated. Use a smaller range. Move slowly, and gradually work within the range that feels appropriate for you. Remember this. The goal isn't to get your arms perfectly overhead tomorrow. The goal is to keep giving your shoulders a reason to move. That mindset is much more useful as you get older. Exercise #5. Controlled sit to stand. And now we come to the final exercise. This one may look incredibly simple, but don't underestimate it. It's the sit to stand. Why is this so important? Because mobility isn't just about stretching your joints. You also need to be able to control movement with your own body weight. When you stand up from a chair, your hips, knees, ankles, core, and leg muscles all have to work together. Your balance and coordination matter too. And that makes the sit to stand a practical whole body movement. Start by sitting toward the front of a sturdy chair. Place your feet approximately hip width apart. Keep your feet firmly on the floor. Now lean your upper body slightly forward. Push through your feet and stand up. Once you're standing, straighten your body comfortably. Then slowly lower yourself back toward the chair. And here's the important part. Don't simply drop into the chair. Control the descent. That slow lowering phase teaches your body to control the movement instead of simply falling into the seat. Then repeat. If you're a beginner, use a higher, sturdy chair. If you need to use the armrest for assistance, that's perfectly reasonable. You can also perform fewer repetitions. The exercise should match your current ability. As you become more comfortable, you can gradually reduce your dependence on your hands. You might eventually use a slightly lower chair. Or you can make the lowering phase slower and more controlled. But there's no rush. Think about how often you perform this movement without even realizing it. Getting off the toilet, standing up from your couch, getting out of a car, rising from the dinner table, getting out of a chair after watching television. These aren't gym exercises. These are life exercises. And that's why the sit to stand deserves your attention. Because being able to stand up from a chair without struggling is not a small thing. It is a piece of independence. And ultimately, that's what this entire mobility routine is about. Not looking impressive, not touching your toes, not performing advanced exercises. It's about keeping your body capable of handling ordinary life with confidence. 5 simple movements, 5 areas of your body, and one bigger goal. To keep moving well enough to keep doing the things that matter to you. Now you know the 5 movements. But here's the part that many people miss. Knowing the exercises is not enough. The real results come from how you practice them. And you don't need to spend an hour stretching every day. In fact, trying to do too much too quickly can be exactly the wrong approach. So, let's go through a few simple rules that can make your mobility routine safer, more practical, and much easier to maintain. Don't chase pain. First, don't make pain your goal. Mobility work should generally feel controlled and manageable. You may notice a gentle stretch, mild tension, or the sensation that you're moving into a range that isn't familiar. That's very different from sharp, severe, or unusual pain. If something hurts sharply, don't tell yourself, "No pain, no gain." That's not the goal here. Simply reduce the range of motion, slow down, or stop the movement. And if you have significant ongoing pain, a recent injury, or a medical condition that affects your movement, it's worth getting individualized advice from an appropriately qualified healthcare professional before starting or changing an exercise routine. Your body doesn't need to be forced. It needs to be trained intelligently. 2. Consistency beats intensity. The second rule is simple. Consistency beats intensity. You don't need to aggressively stretch for an hour once a week and then forget about mobility for the next 6 days. A much more realistic approach is to practice a small amount regularly. For example, you could perform these 5 exercises as a short routine. Spend roughly 30 to 60 seconds on a mobility movement, or perform a small number of slow, controlled repetitions where appropriate. Start with 1 round. That's enough. Then, as your body becomes comfortable with the routine, you can gradually increase the amount of work if it feels appropriate. The important word is gradually. You're not trying to transform your mobility in one afternoon. You're giving your body repeated opportunities to practice useful movement, and that's much easier to maintain. 3. Use mobility throughout the day. Here's another strategy that can make a surprisingly big difference. Don't think of mobility as something that only happens during a workout. Think of it as something you can sprinkle throughout your day. If you've been sitting for a long time, stand up and move around. Before going for a walk, spend a few moments gently moving your ankles, hips, or shoulders. After watching television, instead of immediately sitting back down, walk around the room for a minute or 2. If you're working at a desk, use your breaks as opportunities to change position and move. I like to think of these as movement snacks. You don't need a full meal every time. Sometimes your body just needs a small movement break, and several small movement breaks throughout the day can be much easier to maintain than relying entirely on one workout. 4. Pair mobility with strength. There's another important piece of the puzzle. Mobility alone isn't the entire solution. You also need strength. Why? Because having access to a range of motion is one thing. Being strong enough to control that movement is another. Think about our final exercise, the sit to stand. You're not simply moving your joints through a range. You're using your legs and hips to control your body weight. You're coordinating your movement. You're maintaining balance. And you're producing enough force to stand. That's why mobility and strength work so well together. You want your body to have movement and the ability to control that movement. So alongside mobility exercises, include appropriate strength exercises in your overall weekly routine. For many older adults, simple movements such as sit-to-stands, supported leg exercises, resistance band exercises, or other appropriately scaled strength work can be useful additions. 5. Don't compare yourself with younger people. This one is especially important. Don't look at a 25-year-old on social media doing an extreme stretch and decide that your body is failing because you can't copy it. That's not a useful comparison. Your goal isn't to compete with someone else's body. Your goal is to improve your own movement. Maybe today, you can only move your shoulder halfway overhead comfortably. That's your starting point. Maybe after several weeks of consistent practice, you can move a little farther with better control. That's progress. Maybe getting out of a chair used to require both hands, and now you need only one. That's progress too. Mobility improvements don't always look dramatic. Sometimes they're incredibly practical. A little easier to put on your socks. A little easier to climb the stairs. A little easier to reach the shelf. A little more confidence getting out of a chair. Those small changes matter. So don't chase perfection. Compare yourself with where you were yesterday, not with someone who is decades younger than you. 6. Make the routine sustainable. Finally, make this routine easy enough that you can actually keep doing it. You could divide the 5 exercises throughout your day. In the morning, you might do your ankle mobility and gentle spinal movement. In the afternoon, you could work on your hips and shoulders. And later in the day, you could practice a few controlled sit-to-stands. Or, if you prefer simplicity, perform all 5 together as one short routine. There is no magic requirement that says you must exercise at exactly one particular time. Choose the approach that fits your schedule and your body, because the best mobility routine is not the most complicated one. It's the one you will actually continue doing. And remember, you're not trying to become a different person. You're trying to preserve something incredibly valuable, your ability to move through everyday life with confidence. That is worth a few minutes of your time each day. So let's bring everything together. Today, you learned 5 simple mobility movements. First, the ankle mobility rock, to help your ankles move more comfortably. Second, the hip 90/90 rotation, to give your hips controlled movement in different directions. Third, the cat-cow spinal movement, to gently move your spine rather than keeping it rigid all day. Fourth, the wall shoulder slide, to help you maintain comfortable shoulder movement for everyday reaching. And finally, the controlled sit-to-stand, which brings together your hips, knees, ankles, muscles, balance, and coordination. But remember, these exercises aren't magical cures. They're not designed to fix every pain, injury, or health problem. They're practical tools you can use to maintain and practice useful movement. And that's a much more realistic and much more valuable goal. Think back to the 6'2" we talked about at the beginning. Imagine that putting on his shoes becomes a little easier. Getting up from his favorite chair requires less effort. Reaching toward a shelf doesn't feel quite as restricted. Getting in and out of the car feels more comfortable. And moving through the day doesn't require quite as much thought. Those may sound like small changes, but they're not small when they affect your independence. You don't need to move like you did when you were 25. You don't need to become extremely flexible. And you certainly don't need to perform complicated exercises. You need to keep your body capable of doing the things that matter to you. That's the real goal. Because mobility is an investment in independence. Every time you practice a controlled movement, you're giving your body an opportunity to maintain the skills you use in everyday life. And you don't have to wait until movement becomes severely restricted before you start paying attention to it. Start where you are. Move within a comfortable range. Be consistent. And let improvement happen gradually. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Which of these 5 movements feels the hardest for you right now? Is it your ankles, your hips, your back, your shoulders? Or is getting up and down from a chair the biggest challenge? Tell me in the comments. And if you're going to try this routine, type mobility in the comments so you can make that commitment to yourself. If you found this routine useful, save this video so you can come back to it later. And consider sharing it with a spouse, friend, parent, or anyone over 45 who could benefit from keeping their body moving. Finally, subscribe if you want more simple, practical exercises and healthy aging strategies that you can actually use in everyday life. And remember, your goal isn't to move perfectly. Your goal is to keep moving well enough to live the life you want.